In the late 1880s, in the Englewood neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, a man began building a structure at the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets. Construction spanned roughly 2 years, between 1889 and 1891. The building was originally 2 stories high, with storefronts on the ground floor and apartments above. Later, a 3rd story was added. In the decades that followed, this building would be wrapped in layer after layer of legend, most of it exaggerated well beyond what the historical record can support. But beneath the folklore lies a documented and disturbing case, one that was ultimately settled not in Chicago, but in a Philadelphia courtroom. The man was born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. He would become far better known by the name H. Holmes. Much of the enduring myth centers on the building itself, often called the Murder Castle. Popular retellings describe a hotel full of trap doors and hidden chambers where anonymous guests checked in and were never seen again. But modern historical research urges caution. The 3rd floor was never finished, furnished, or open to the public. The 9 victims that historians can say with confidence Holmes killed were not random strangers who wandered inside. They were people he already knew, associates, women in his life, and members of a single family. That distinction matters because it moves this case away from horror story fantasy and toward the colder, more deliberate reality that investigators actually uncovered. The reality began to surface through an insurance scheme. Holmes had entangled himself with a man named Benjamin Pitezel and Pitezel's family. When the scheme unraveled, it drew the attention of authorities, and on November 17, 1894, Holmes was arrested. He was taken into custody by Boston police officers, together with an agent from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But the arrest left an unsettling question hanging in the air. Several members of the Pitezel family, 3 of the children, were unaccounted for. Their whereabouts were unknown, and Holmes offered no reliable answers. That silence set in motion one of the most methodical investigations of its era. In June 1895, a Philadelphia detective named Frank Geyer left the city to retrace Holmes's movements. This was old-fashioned detective work. No forensic laboratories, no databases, only train schedules, hotel registers, and the patient tracing of a man who had crossed borders and covered his tracks. Geyer followed the trail city by city, checking rented houses and questioning anyone who might have seen the children. The search led him across the border, into Toronto. There, in a rented property, Geyer found the bodies of 2 of the Pitezel children, the girls, Alice and Nellie. It was a devastating discovery, and it confirmed the worst fears about what had happened to the family. But one child, Howard, was still missing. Geyer pressed on. His search eventually brought him to Irvington, near Indianapolis, Indiana, where he found the burnt remains of Howard Pitezel. Geyer's persistence transformed a suspicious insurance case into a documented multiple murder. The detective work, spanning cities and an international border, produced the physical evidence that a courtroom would need. 3 children were dead. Their father, Benjamin Pitezel, was dead as well, and the man at the center of it all was already in custody. The trial began on October 28, 1895, in Philadelphia. Holmes was tried specifically for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. The proceedings drew intense public attention, but the outcome, when it came quickly. On November 7, 1895, after only a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Holmes guilty. According to the Schuylkill Valley Journal, jury foreman Linford L. Biles pronounced a single word: guilty. At sentencing on November 30th, Judge Michael Arnold denied Holmes's motion for a new trial. Holmes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by hanging. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported that the jury found him guilty and that he was sentenced to hang. There would be no reversal of that verdict. While awaiting execution, Holmes reportedly confessed to a staggering number of killings, 27 murders in total. But confessions from Holmes came with a heavy caveat. He was, by nearly every account, a chronic liar, and some of the people he claimed to have murdered were later found to be alive. His confession cannot be taken at face value. This is why historians settle on a far smaller, more defensible figure: 9 confirmed victims. The gap between the theatrical number he confessed to and the number that can actually be verified is itself part of the story, a reminder of how easily myth can outpace fact. Holmes was executed by hanging on May 7, 1896, at Moya-Menzing Prison in Pennsylvania. He was 34 years old. The conviction was carried out in full, never overturned, never vacated, never followed by any exoneration. The building in Englewood outlived the man. It was damaged by fire in 1895, just before the trial. The structure remained standing until 1938, when it was finally torn down. Today, the site at 63rd and Wallace is occupied by the Englewood branch of the U.S. Post Office, an ordinary public building on an ordinary corner, giving no hint of what once stood there. What lingers about this case is not the folklore, but the way fact and fiction became fused in the public imagination. Over the years, the murder castle grew into a monument of invented horror, sealed rooms, endless anonymous victims, mechanical death traps. Yet the historical evidence tells a narrower and more human story. 9 people, most of them known to their killer, including 4 members of one family whose children were hunted down and found by a single determined detective. Frank Geyer's willingness to cross an international border and keep searching for missing children. In many ways, the true heart of this case, a case that reminds us how important it is to separate what can be verified from what has simply been repeated. The legend belongs to fiction. The conviction, the evidence, and the victims belong to history.